And now on the line is Sheila Gilheany. Sheila is the CEO of Alcohol Action Ireland. Sheila, welcome back to Near FM.
And thanks very much, Darren, for having me on.
Okay, Sheila, today is our first interview on Near FM in just over 2 months. Last week there was big news reported that the English Premier League, the biggest football league in England, and I believe it is the biggest football league in the world, there was big news reported last week. For the benefit of any of our listeners who don't know what this news is, Sheila, can you tell them what it is?
So what we've seen reported is that Diageo are getting involved with the Premier League in a deal worth, I think, 40 million pounds sterling. So that's sort of similar to, I suppose, the kind of promotion that we've seen of alcohol in other sports arenas. Like, for example, we see the Guinness Six Nations in rugby being sponsored by Guinness. And this particular one is, it's very much directed towards like an audience, very often, young men, who are particularly interested in football. And we would see it as a way of associating a healthy activity like sport with a very unhealthy product, and we would certainly be very concerned about that because it's a very insidious form of marketing.
Okay, I personally respect the skills of a lot of the players in the English Premier League, but I just personally find it so disappointing that we're going to see a continued big association between sports, or football in this case, and alcohol over the next few years. And you mentioned there we still have Guinness supporting the main sponsor. The Six Nations Rugby, the official name of it is actually Guinness Six Nations, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. Well, that's the name that I suppose that the rugby organisations allow it to be called, and that's what Guinness pay for in terms of sponsorship, is so that you constantly use this name and you're using it all the time in the context of rugby, and it's a very clever form of marketing because you're constantly using the name, and it also, of course, gives them rights to have their their logo in various places on. In and around the pitch and different things, like that. So what sports sponsorship does is that it binds together a number of elements of the sport itself with this particular product. So, for many sports fans, there's a dedication to their particular team or to, simply to the sport itself. And there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of passion that, that goes with following a particular sport, be it rugby or, a Premier League or football or whatever, that's there. And what sports sponsorship does is it harnesses that excitement, that passion, that kind of thing that you have. And it's also that it gets, children at a very young age, because you find these, deep interest in sports starting at a young age with children, and so they get that linkage with the unhealthy product, in this case Guinness, with the with the healthy activity of the sport itself.
Okay, I've heard the comments said over the last few years that in years to come people are going to look back in shock and surprise at the advertising connection between sports and alcohol companies. Would you agree with that, Sheila?
Oh, absolutely. And I think if we look back at the times, 40, 50 years ago, where you would have seen tobacco sports sponsorship, that was a very common thing to see. And I think that would have gone up until certainly into the 80s. You'd seen various sports being sponsored by tobacco. Now that that's been banned, we look at that and we think, gosh, that was mad. You really do. And you see it for what it was, and I think in years to come, we will step away from alcohol sports marketing, and it'll allow us to better see what this product actually is, an unhealthy product.
Okay, on the issue of public health alcohol policy, am I correct in saying, Sheila, that our country, the Republic of Ireland, is doing better than they are in the UK and indeed most other countries around the world?
So recently there has been some data actually has been published through the HRB. It's very interesting data. There are some improvements. So, just to look at these in terms of the amount of alcohol that we're drinking at the moment, there is a reduction in that. And, I will say that alcohol consumption has been reducing from a very high level that it was at in the early 2000s. And it's down now to about just under 10 litres per capita. And that's just a way of being able to measure it, and to be able to make these comparisons. Certainly in the last few years, since 2018, it has actually dropped by 10% in alcohol consumption per capita. Now, if you were to compare that with the UK, since 2013, they've actually seen their alcohol consumption rise by 5%. And the reason that I just point out the difference between the UK and Ireland in this is that we have implemented, some fairly modest measures, but good measures around alcohol control policy through the Public Health Alcohol Act. So these would have things like minimum pricing of alcohol, some restrictions on the advertising of alcohol, some restrictions on special offers, things like that. So we are starting to see, some of the impact of that. I would say there has been a 10% reduction since some of those measures were introduced. But at the same time, we are still drinking a lot. And to put that into context, if Ireland as a whole was drinking at the HSE lower risk drinking guidelines, we'd actually be drinking about nearly 40% less than what we're currently doing. So there are positives. We are coming down, but we're still at a high level. And also what is concerning is our patterns of drinking. And what I mean by that is that we have high levels of what's called binge drinking or heavy episodic drinking. That means drinking a lot at any one particular time. And now if you were to make the comparisons on that across, say for example, OECD countries, we're the 8th highest across the OECD. And we know that this is important because that type of drinking is, it is particularly harmful to our health. It's more likely to lead to falls, to accidents, to immediate harms, and also it has significant impacts on things like liver disease, cancer, things like that.
Yeah, I did an interview with Joe Barry a few weeks ago at Squelga, and he was saying that he thinks we have seen a 10% reduction, and it's because of the Public Health Alcohol Act. I don't know if you agree with that. And I also believe that, for the benefit of our listeners, we're actually the first country, I believe, in the world to bring in a Public Health Alcohol Act, aren't we?
Well, actually, there are other countries which have, done some very good work, and I always point to Norway in this regard. So Norway, for example, would have a complete ban on alcohol advertising, and there's certainly no alcohol sports marketing in Norway. So that's, really quite significantly different from us. What we have here are some restrictions on alcohol advertising. So, for example, you can't advertise on public transport or close to schools, or on the field of play during a sporting event. So that's, while it's good, it is very modest in comparison to a complete ban on alcohol advertising. But we have other things that we're doing which we're definitely leading the way. One of those would be on the labelling of alcohol products, giving health information to be provided on all alcohol products when they're sold. Now that's a very comprehensive set of warnings, which include warnings about liver disease, about not drinking in pregnancy, and also about a warning about alcohol causing cancers, actually causing fatal cancers. So that's definitely a particular area that we're leading the field in. That legislation, it was actually passed back in 2018, that Public Health Alcohol Act that I mentioned, but it'll be 2026 before you actually see those labels on products. So, we're leading in some ways. We're definitely better than some countries, but I would say we still have quite a long way to go.
I think it's great as well that when you go into a supermarket nowadays or a shop that sells alcohol, there's kind of like a restriction there, the separation.
Yeah.
That's called, I believe, structural separation, is it?
It is indeed, and again, that's part of that Public Health Alcohol Act, and it is a very important measure. And even though it might seem like a small thing, it's really making the point that alcohol is not the same as, it's not an ordinary product. It's not the same as going to the shop to buy milk or bread or whatever. It's distinctly different, and it's giving a message, firstly to children, that it is that bit different, but it also takes a bit of pressure off people. For example, might be in recovery, just not particularly wanting to drink, that it's just that little bit less being pushed into your face. So it's a small measure, but it is an important one.
Okay, Sheila, let's come towards the end of our interviews today on Near FM. Can you tell me, if we're speaking of the Public Health Alcohol Act there, but can you tell me if there's any more news in relation to the implementation of the Public Health Alcohol Act, and also, is there any more news with the bringing in of the sale of alcohol bill since our last interview?
So, in relation to the implementation of the Act, the next bit to be implemented will happen in January of next year, January 2025, which would be the broadcast watershed on alcohol advertisements, so that you won't see alcohol ads on TV before 9 p.m. and some restrictions as well on radio. So we look forward to seeing that. But there's still some outstanding work to be done. We're waiting for the restrictions on the content of alcohol advertisements to be implemented, which is really all about trying to strip away the myth-making that you would get from alcohol ads, and to really to have them as purely factual, giving details of where you can buy the product, how much it is, things like that. So, in relation though to the sale of alcohol bill, as you would know, we have been campaigning strongly on this particular issue, because on the one hand you have this, modest progress being made via the Public Health Alcohol Act legislation that came out of the Department of Health. But on the other hand, we have the sale of alcohol bill, which is legislation coming from the Department of Justice, which is actually seeking to increase licensing hours and so increase alcohol availability. Now, we were somewhat heartened that with the new Taoiseach, with Simon Harris, when he came into office, he did say that this was legislation that needed a second look, is how he put it. And we were very glad to hear that being said. The kind of second look that we think that would be useful is to carry out a health impact assessment of the proposals in the bill, but really put it into context. What would it actually mean in terms of how many additional presentations to EDs, for example, might result as because of extended licensing hours? How many extra ED staff would you need to have to be able to deal with that? How much would it cost? What would the burden be on Gardaí having to police later on into the night? Things like that. So we're certainly heartened to see that comment being made, but we would like to see that health impact assessment carried out, so that would, I suppose, make it clear of what planning firstly would need to be done, and more importantly, I suppose, point out that it's not a good idea to actually have to increase our licensing hours at all.